Can I guess what you drive? Because I think people would guess that you drive like a muscle car. I think you drive a truck.
I could drive a truck.
Yeah. What do you drive?
I drive a Typhoon, a GMC Typhoon.
Of course.
It's actually a turboed V6. It's fast.
Yes! All right.
At 95 years old, with a fortune hovering near $400 million, Clint Eastwood does something almost no billionaire does anymore. He drives himself to the gas station and pumps his own fuel. No entourage, no spectacle, just Clint, standing beside a car most people would have traded in decades ago. And that's where the mystery begins. Because this isn't forgetfulness or nostalgia, it's a choice. A 37-year-old car, still in daily rotation, owned by one of the richest and most powerful men in Hollywood history. So why refuse to upgrade? What does this car say about how Clint Eastwood actually lives? And more importantly, what exactly is the car Clint Eastwood drives at 95? The car he actually drives at 95. So let's answer the question that's been quietly hanging in the air since that gas station moment. It isn't a Ferrari. It isn't a Bentley. It isn't a modern luxury SUV packed with screens and self-driving modes. The car Clint Eastwood actually drives at 95 years old is a 1988 Mercedes-Benz 500 SEC, part of the legendary W126 S-Class line. And once you hear what that car represents, the choice starts to make unsettling sense. Think about the math for a second. The car is 37 years old. Clint Eastwood is 95. That means this Mercedes has been with him for more than a third of his life. Long enough to outlast movie trends, Hollywood eras, studio power shifts, and even the rise and fall of entire car brands. While celebrities around him cycled through supercars like fashion accessories, this one stayed put. Same body, same badge, same quiet presence. Recent sightings confirm it is not a garage queen or a sentimental relic rolled out for special occasions. People have seen him driving it himself, pulling into everyday places, stopping for fuel, and handling the routine details of life without an assistant doing it for him. No cameras allowed, no performance, just usage. And that detail matters more than it sounds. The 500 SEC was not designed to scream wealth. When it was new, it was expensive, but it was built around something different. It was engineered for durability, comfort, and long-term trust. This was Mercedes, in an era when engineers were allowed to overbuild, when doors closed with weight, and when longevity was a design goal instead of a marketing slogan. The W126 series earned a reputation for being almost stubbornly reliable. Many are still on the road decades later, not because they are collectible toys, but because they refuse to die. That fits Eastwood in an almost uncomfortable way. At 95, Clint Eastwood has nothing left to prove. He is not auditioning for relevance. He is not signaling status. He has already lived through the stage where wealth needs to be visible. Driving this Mercedes is not about nostalgia. It is about alignment. The car reflects a mindset that values things that work quietly, consistently, and without applause. There is also something deeper hiding here. In a culture where luxury cars are often used as social armor, switching models every few years to signal success, Eastwood's refusal to upgrade feels like a rejection of that entire game. He does not perform well. He does not announce it. He does not translate money into noise. Ask yourself honestly, if you had unlimited money, would you keep the same car for 37 years? Most people would say no without hesitation. New tech, new comfort, new image. But Clint Eastwood already knows something many people learn too late. At a certain point, upgrades stop improving your life. They just add complexity. The 500 SEC already does what he needs it to do. It starts, it drives, it feels solid. It asks for nothing beyond respect and maintenance. And that may be the most revealing detail of all. This car is not about speed, flash, or attention. It is about trust. Eastwood trusts it the way you trust a long-term companion. Quietly. Without explanation. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. This Mercedes was not the first time Clint Eastwood surprised people with his choice of a daily driver. Long before this understated German coupe became his constant, he was already signaling something about how he sees cars, fame, and himself. So, what was the surprising car Clint Eastwood drove before this one, and why did it confuse people just as much at the time? The SUV that shocked Jimmy Fallon. And once you realize Clint Eastwood sticks with things he trusts, that late-night television moment suddenly hits different. Back in 2016, Clint Eastwood was sitting comfortably on Jimmy Fallon's couch, relaxed, joking, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. Fallon, doing what hosts do, steered the conversation toward cars, probably expecting a harmless answer. Maybe a vintage classic, maybe a luxury brand. Something safe. Instead, Eastwood casually dropped a detail that made the room pause for half a second longer than usual. He said he drove a GMC Typhoon, not past tense, not as a collector's item. He said it the way someone mentions a familiar pair of shoes, like it was the most normal thing in the world. You can see Fallon's reaction in real time, a mix of confusion and surprise, followed by curiosity. Because the GMC Typhoon does not match the public image people carry of Clint Eastwood, it is not elegant, it is not European, it is not what you expect a Hollywood legend to casually drive daily. And that is exactly why it matters. The Typhoon came out in the early 1990s, during a strange and experimental era in American car design. On the surface, it looked like a compact SUV with blacked-out trim and nothing flashy going on. But underneath, it was something entirely different. GMC had quietly built a performance monster and wrapped it in an unassuming body. This SUV was turbocharged at a time when SUVs were slow, boxy, and built strictly for utility. The Typhoon pushed around 280 horsepower, which does not sound wild today, but in 1992, it was borderline absurd for a truck-based vehicle. Even more shocking was the acceleration. 0 to 60 in around 5 seconds. Faster than many sports cars of the era. Faster than vehicles that cost 2 or 3 times as much. Most people never saw it coming. That is why the Typhoon developed a reputation as a sleeper. From the outside, it looked ordinary. On the road, it embarrassed cars that were supposed to be fast. Ferraris, Corvettes, and flashy imports would line up next to it, assuming an easy win, only to get walked off the line by a square little SUV with a GMC badge. That contrast fits Clint Eastwood almost too perfectly. At the time, he was already an established icon, Oscar winner, director, cultural force. Yet he chose a vehicle that refused to announce itself. A car built for people who cared about what something could do, not what it signaled. The Typhoon was never about status. It was about capability hiding in plain sight. And Eastwood did not hype it. He did not explain it. He did not frame it as a clever choice. He simply drove it. That detail is important because it shows this pattern did not start with the Mercedes. Long before the 1988 500 SEC became his steady companion, Eastwood was already rejecting the idea that cars were tools for image management. He gravitated toward vehicles that did their job quietly, sometimes brutally well, without demanding attention. There is also something generational happening here. Clint Eastwood came up in a time when machines were judged by how they performed over the years, not by how quickly they could be replaced. The Typhoon was built during a brief window when American manufacturers took risks without worrying about focus groups. It existed because someone asked, what if we made an SUV that could outrun sports cars, and then actually followed through? That kind of thinking resonates with someone who spent decades making films his own way, often against trends, often against expectations. So, when people laugh at the idea of Clint Eastwood driving a GMC Typhoon, they miss the deeper point. He was never chasing luxury or flash. He was choosing machines that reflected how he moved through the world. Capable, understated, slightly underestimated. Which brings us to the part most people still do not know. Because the Typhoon was not just a quirky SUV with a turbo. In real-world performance, under the right conditions, it could do something that sounds almost ridiculous today. What if I told you this ordinary SUV could embarrass Ferraris? When practical cars were faster than supercars. Yes, the GMC Typhoon could outrun Ferraris off the line, and not in a legend-after-the-fact way. In real traffic, at real stoplights, in moments where nobody was filming and nobody was trying to make a point. Here's what most people never hear. In the early 1990s, the Typhoon packed a turbocharged 4.3-liter V6 pushing about 280 horsepower, and, more importantly, a wall of torque that arrived instantly. Pair that with all-wheel drive and a tight automatic transmission, and you had something exotic brands were not prepared for. While Ferraris and Lamborghinis of the era relied on high revs, rear-wheel drive, and perfect launches, the Typhoon simply hooked up and went. No drama, no wheel spin, just forward motion. 0 to 60 came in roughly 5 seconds. Some tests clocked it even quicker under ideal conditions. That put it in the same conversation as Ferraris costing 3 or 4 times as much. But the real shock was not the numbers on paper. It was how repeatable that performance was. You did not need a racetrack or a professional driver. You could be an older guy in casual clothes, rolling up to a light, pressing the pedal, and leaving a bright red supercar scrambling for traction. That's the part that made the Typhoon dangerous to egos. Clint Eastwood was never interested in theoretical performance. He cared about what worked in the real world. Traffic, stoplights, short merges, cold starts. The kind of driving that actually happens in daily life. The Typhoon's turbo torque hit low and hard, exactly where you feel it most. No waiting, no drama, just an instant response. And that detail says a lot about how he thinks. Exotic cars sell a fantasy. They look fast even when parked. They announce wealth before the engine starts. But they often demand compromise. Low ground clearance, unforgiving clutches, constant attention. They perform best when conditions are perfect, and the driver is fully focused on managing them. The Typhoon didn't ask for any of that. It was fast when it mattered, invisible when it didn't. You could load groceries in it, drive it in bad weather, sit higher than traffic, and still outrun cars that were supposed to be untouchable. That combination is rare, even today. Eastwood's choice quietly exposed a truth most car marketing tries to bury. Performance without usability is theater. It looks good on posters and social media, but it rarely improves your actual life. Real performance shows up when nobody is watching. That's why the Typhoon confused people. It broke the visual rules. It looked like something a contractor might drive, not a Hollywood icon. But underneath, it carried serious engineering intent. GMC built it during a brief moment when practicality and performance overlapped without apology. They didn't dress it up. They didn't over-explain it. They just made it brutally effective. And Eastwood noticed. This wasn't about rebellion or irony, it was about honesty. The Typhoon did exactly what it promised, and nothing more. No image maintenance required, no explanation needed. If someone underestimated it, that was their mistake. That mindset runs straight through Eastwood's career. He never chased trends. He never overperformed emotion. He let results speak quietly, often later, sometimes decades later. The Typhoon fit that rhythm perfectly. So, when people laugh at the idea of a practical SUV embarrassing Ferraris, they're laughing at the wrong thing. What should surprise them is how often image loses to function when nobody is trying to sell you something. Now here's the twist. Even after proving that a boxy American SUV could humble supercars, Clint Eastwood didn't escalate to something louder or flashier. He went in the opposite direction, quieter, heavier, more restrained, because the next car choice shocked people for an entirely different reason. If the Typhoon was about hidden speed, what do you think Eastwood chose when speed stopped being the point at all? At 83, Clint Eastwood drove an electric Fiat. And just when people thought they had Clint Eastwood figured out, he did something that completely scrambled the mental picture. At 83 years old, while directing one of the most intense war films of the decade, Clint Eastwood showed up to the set of American Sniper driving a tiny electric Fiat 500e. Not as a publicity stunt, not for a photo op. He simply arrived, parked it, stepped out, and went to work like it was the most normal thing in the world. Picture that for a second. This is the man whose on-screen image was built on grit, steel, and quiet toughness. The same guy who made Dirty Harry feel like a warning, not a character. And here he is, rolling onto a military film set in a silent, palm-sized electric car that looks more at home squeezing through Italian alleyways than navigating Hollywood backlots. People didn't know what to do with that image. The Fiat 500e was not fast. It was not loud. It was not impressive on paper. It had a modest range, a compact electric motor, and an interior designed for simplicity rather than luxury. In an era when electric cars were still treated like experimental gadgets, this one was especially easy to dismiss. Yet Eastwood chose it anyway. Why? Because once again, he wasn't chasing symbolism. He was choosing what made sense. The 500e was quiet, easy to park, smooth in traffic, and effortless to drive around Los Angeles. It did exactly what he needed it to do. No more, no less. And there's another layer most headlines skipped. Eastwood was personally involved in environmental causes long before electric cars became fashionable. He supported clean energy initiatives, conservation efforts, and practical steps that reduced waste without turning them into political theater. This wasn't a sudden pivot, it was consistency. What made the moment even more surprising was the cultural expectation attached to him. Many people assumed they already knew where Clint Eastwood stood, not just on movies, but on everything. Old Hollywood, tough guy roles, traditional values. The Fiat quietly shattered that oversimplified box. He didn't announce it. He didn't explain it. He didn't defend it. He just drove the car. On set, nobody made a scene out of it. Crew members noticed, word spread, and the story leaked the way real stories usually do, slowly, casually, without polish. And that authenticity is what made it stick. Think about the contrast. Earlier, he drove a GMC Typhoon that could outrun Ferraris while looking like a regular SUV. Now he's driving a tiny electric city car while directing a film about war, sacrifice, and American identity. Both choices reject surface-level expectations. Both prioritize function over image. The Fiat also revealed something quieter about Eastwood's relationship with age. At 83, he wasn't trying to prove youth or relevance. He wasn't hiding behind nostalgia. He was adapting without making noise about it. That's rare, especially in Hollywood, where aging is often treated like something to camouflage. Instead of clinging to symbols of power, he chose ease. Instead of broadcasting values, he lived them. And instead of performing a persona, he let contradictions exist without explanation. Would you expect Clint Eastwood to drive an electric car? Most people wouldn't. And that's the point. His choices don't line up with caricatures. They line up with a personal code that seems almost stubbornly resistant to trends, labels, and outside expectations. Which brings us to the bigger question hiding beneath all of this. If Clint Eastwood doesn't chase luxury, doesn't chase speed anymore, and doesn't chase trends, then what actually guides his decisions when it comes to cars and life itself? The discipline that explains everything. And once you zoom out, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The answer isn't in his garage, it's in his daily routine. Clint Eastwood didn't reach 95 by accident, and he didn't stay sharp by luck. The same discipline that quietly shaped his health also shaped the way he chooses cars, projects, and even silence. While the world looks for shortcuts, he built habits that compound slowly, almost invisibly, over decades. One of the most misunderstood pieces of his life is transcendental meditation. Eastwood has practiced it for years, sometimes twice a day, not as a trend, not as a performance, but as maintenance. He's described it as a way to clear mental noise, reduce stress, and stay grounded. No drama, no mysticism, just a tool that works if you show up consistently. That detail matters because stress quietly destroys people long before age does. High blood pressure, inflammation, burnout, and impulsive decisions. Eastwood's approach was to lower the volume of the world rather than fight it head-on. Meditation wasn't about escaping reality. It was about staying steady inside it. Then there's his diet, which surprises people expecting extreme rules. He didn't follow crash diets or celebrity fads. Instead, he practiced restraint, smaller portions, clean, simple food, less sugar, less excess. He paid attention without turning eating into a spectacle. Over time, that discipline compounds just like interest. Not dramatic day to day, but powerful year to year. And here's the key connection most people miss. This is the same mindset you see in his car choices. Eastwood doesn't buy things to feel something new. He buys things to remove friction from his life. A reliable car reduces stress. A familiar car reduces decisions. A car that works the same way every time frees mental energy for things that actually matter. That's long-term thinking. Most people live in short loops. They chase novelty, upgrades, quick rewards, and visible wins. Eastwood plays a different game. He asks one question quietly and sticks to it. Will this still work for me years from now? That question applies to meditation, food, work ethic, and yes, cars. A flashy car feels good today. A dependable one feels good every day. One feeds the ego, the other feeds peace. And peace, over decades, becomes health. Even his work schedule reflects this discipline. Well into his 90s, Eastwood still directs, still shows up early, and still prepares obsessively. He doesn't overshoot energy. He doesn't waste motion. Crew members often talk about how efficient his sets are. Few takes, clear decisions, no chaos. That's not talent alone. That's discipline, practiced for a lifetime. Now think about the Mercedes again. Heavy doors, simple controls, built to last. No constant updates, no learning curve, no distraction. It's a machine designed for long-term use, just like his routines are designed for long-term living. This is why his longevity confuses people. They want a secret pill, a breakthrough hack, a hidden shortcut. What they find instead is consistency, repetition, choosing the boring option when it's the smarter one, choosing calm when noise is available. Here's the uncomfortable question this raises for all of us. Do you think discipline shows up in the things we buy? Because when you look closely, purchases are rarely about objects. They're about identity. Are you buying excitement or are you buying stability? Are you chasing attention or are you reducing stress? Are you thinking in months or are you thinking in decades? Clint Eastwood answered those questions a long time ago, and he hasn't changed his answers just because the world did. And that brings us to the most revealing part of this story. Because this same philosophy didn't just shape the cars he drove, it shaped the cars he refused to let go of. So, which vehicles did Clint Eastwood choose to keep forever? And what do they reveal about how he thinks when everyone else is chasing the next upgrade? When cars become memories, not trophies. And once you see how deeply discipline shapes his life, another layer quietly comes into focus. Some of Clint Eastwood's cars aren't collectibles. They're chapters of his life. This is where the story shifts from engines to memory. Because when Eastwood keeps a car, it is rarely about horsepower, rarity, or resale value. It is about what that machine witnessed when the cameras were off. Take the Jaguar XK150. On paper, it is beautiful. British curves, classic lines, the kind of car collectors drool over. But for Eastwood, it isn't a trophy. It's tied to a moment when his career changed direction in a risky way. In 1971, Eastwood directed and starred in Play Misty for Me, his first time behind the camera. It was a psychological thriller, smaller in scale, personal in tone, and very different from the tough guy roles that made him famous. The Jaguar appears in the film, sleek and confident, moving through a story about obsession, vulnerability, and control slipping away. After filming Wrapped, Eastwood didn't let the car disappear into a studio archive. He kept it. That detail matters more than people realize. That Jaguar represents a leap, a moment when he trusted himself enough to change lanes creatively. Every time he saw that car, it didn't remind him of status. It was reminding him of courage, of betting on himself before anyone knew if it would work. That pattern repeats decades later with a car that carries even heavier emotional weight. The Gran Torino. In 2008, Eastwood starred in Gran Torino, playing Walt Kowalski, a bitter, aging man clinging to old values in a world that no longer reflects them back. The car itself, a 1972 Gran Torino, is not just transportation in the film. It is the character's anchor. His pride, his connection to the past, his armor. What most people don't know is that after filming ended, Eastwood bought the car. Not because it was rare, not because it was appreciating in value, but because it had become part of the story he told. The Gran Torino wasn't acting, it was carrying memory, of aging, of regret, of redemption, of letting go without erasing who you were. That decision says everything about how he relates to objects. For many celebrities, cars are proof of success, proof of taste, proof that they've arrived. For Eastwood, cars are witnesses. They stay because they were present during moments that mattered. This is why his garage doesn't look like a showroom. It looks like a timeline. Each vehicle marks a phase, a shift, a risk taken, a lesson learned. And when the meaning fades, he doesn't cling to the object. He lets it go. No announcement, no auction spectacle, just quiet movement forward. That's the opposite of how most people treat possessions. We're taught to chase value, rarity, and flex potential. Eastwood seems to chase resonance. If something holds a story, it stays. If it doesn't, it leaves. Think about how different that mindset is. The Jaguar reminds him of becoming a director. The Gran Torino reminds him of confronting age and legacy. The Mercedes reminds him that reliability beats novelty when time becomes precious. None of these cars is shouting. None of them is trying to impress strangers. They exist to serve memory, not ego. And this reveals something deeper about how Eastwood sees life itself. He doesn't freeze moments in museums. He carries them forward quietly, integrated, useful, alive. So, here's a question worth sitting with. Is there an object in your life that tells your story? Not the most expensive thing you own, not the flashiest, but something that stayed because it was there when you became someone new. Because when you understand that, Clint Eastwood's car choices stop looking strange and start looking honest. And it leads us to the final question that ties everything together. After all these years, all these cars, and all these choices, what does this say about who Clint Eastwood really is today? The authenticity paradox. And after all the cars, the stories, the memories tucked into garages and garages of quiet reflection, we arrive at something that might seem almost invisible at first glance. Clint Eastwood doesn't perform well. He performs a restraint. That's the paradox. In a world where celebrity culture often measures value in flashes of chrome and Instagram approval, Eastwood quietly refuses the spectacle. He doesn't need to make a statement with a car. He doesn't need to flaunt a collection to prove he's arrived. He simply lives alongside the objects that mean something, letting the rest fade away. Consider his 1988 Mercedes. It's not a supercar, and it's not rare or flashy, but he drives it faithfully. There's no press release, no auction house drama, and no hashtag campaign. Just a car that serves a purpose, that accompanies him without demanding attention. It's simple, it's reliable, and it's honest. And that choice mirrors a larger truth about Eastwood himself. Authenticity, not display, is the metric by which he measures life. When you look across his garage, from the Jaguar that marked a creative leap with Play Misty for Me to the Gran Torino that became a vessel of memory, there's a consistent thread. These cars weren't chosen for value, rarity, or status. They were chosen because they witnessed moments that mattered, because they anchored memory, and because they told a story that only he could understand. And in that, there's a lesson about restraint, about choosing meaning over spectacle in a world that constantly confuses the two. It also highlights something we rarely consider in our obsession with celebrity collections. Most modern stars perform abundance. Every object must signal wealth, taste, and relevance. Eastwood doesn't perform abundantly. He performs with quiet consistency. He proves that presence, patience, and personal significance carry far more weight than flash. And maybe that's the quiet punchline here. The car isn't the point. Picture Eastwood at a gas station, 95 years old, sliding behind the wheel of his 1988 Mercedes, doing exactly what he wants, nothing more. It makes you wonder, would you keep the same car for decades if you could afford anything? Is success really about accumulation, or is it about intention? What would your car say about you if it could speak? Eastwood drives, but he also teaches, showing that the rarest luxury might just be living life on your own terms.